Hi, welcome to the Whistleblower Newsroom. I'm Christina Borgeson. My guest today describes himself as a concerned citizen who has been hunting the oligarchy and deep state since 2004. You've probably seen Dr. Patrick Byrne on TV, as he's been in the media lately talking about evidence showing that recent presidential elections were rigged. Needless to say, he's been getting pushback. So who is he, and why would the mainstream media give him airtime? Dr. Byrne was educated in Ivy League universities. He has a master's in ethics and doctorate in philosophy. And he went on to become a very successful businessman who knows a thing or two about the internet. He's the former CEO of Overstock.com and founder of WorldStock, a socially responsible internet store for products handcrafted by artisans from developing nations and rural areas of the US. But Dr. Byrne is even more than all that. In 2005, he began a campaign against corruption in capital markets through securities manipulation. Wall Street analysts and the press pushed back then, prompting Dr. Byrne to continue his campaign by setting up a website called deepcapture.com. That's where you'll find his article titled "Election 2020 Was Rigged: The Evidence." Welcome, Dr. Byrne.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So
now, may I ask you a question? I know that this is Progressive Radio Network, but is our picture being broadcast as well?
It will be on the social media platforms.
Okay. I should have brushed my hair more. Sorry.
You look fine. So listen, let's start at the very beginning, okay?
Please.
What prompted you to get involved in this?
In this referring to just this election issue?
Well,
or this,
I wanted to start with that, but I have to, I'm just going to tell you off the bat, you're a very interesting person to me.
I get that a lot.
You know?
Interesting. It would scare me.
Well, you know why I say that before we get into all this? I say that because of my own background. I was reared in Haiti.
Really?
Member of the morally repugnant elite. And so I know all about the shenanigans of the powerful from an up close and very personal view. And it takes a lot of, I mean, it's almost, I guess somebody would say noblesse oblige in your case, you know, because you don't have to do this. And I think that noblesse oblige is a very underappreciated thing, particularly in these times, you know?
Well, I appreciate that. It's rare. I don't think I've ever met a journalist who knew what noblesse oblige was, let alone used it correctly in a sentence. So, yeah, I hate to say it. I guess well, for one thing, since you bring it up, do you really want me to address?
Yes.
It may be, I'm sure it looks, and it's perfectly appropriate to think that of me. I mean, I can see why. I guess I think of my background as a little bit more complicated. I come from a family that actually we started off as, say, lower middle class, working class Irish. Over the first 20 years of my life, my family lived the Horatio Alger dream. So I sort of, growing up, I got to see society from a lot of different levels. I don't really think of it in such class terms, though. I do think I'm a citizen. I think citizens have obligations. And it's funny, when I took on Wall Street, people used to, in 05 to 08, I got in this very nasty fight with Wall Street, and I knew the savings of America were being looted. I knew they were destroying companies. I knew they were going to melt it. We were going to have a systemic crisis because of it, which Greenspan, everyone forgets that in 08, he confirmed exactly what I'd been saying. And lastly, that the SEC was either asleep at the switch or in bed with Wall Street. And everybody thought I was crazy back then. And they would ask me, why you get in the fight? And I guess I said, well, if I walked past an alleyway and there was some little old lady getting mugged, you wouldn't just turn your eyes and do it. I mean, who wouldn't could do? Either you at least are calling the police, or you're going down and getting in someone's grill or something. I don't see these situations as fundamentally any different just because we're removed from it through
Well,
various mechanisms.
I agree. I agree. But I will tell you this, okay? As a whistleblower myself, which is why I even started this show, right? Um, I had the same, I have the same instinct, which has gotten me into a lot of trouble. I mean, I went to the school, you know, Columbia School of Journalism. I was educated in the
Best.
private institutions. I, having been reared in Haiti under Papa Doc, I was thrilled to be part of the freest press in the world until I realized I was not, you know, and it was such a shock to me. And it was such a shock to me that my colleagues would keep their jobs, would lie. I mean, your responsibility as a journalist is to tell the truth and to do the reporting, not just to report an official narrative that might not be true.
Of course.
And it was such a shock.
It is a shock, isn't it? And, you know, it's a shock. I learned about it from different ways. One, I lived in China, 83, 84, and I experienced things there. And when I came home, I was so
Like what?
shocked. Well,
Like,
I just saw how the party line worked and how party line media worked. But when I came home to the US, and I was shocked that I had ever experienced our media as independent and neutral and unbiased, you know, people inquisitively seeking the truth. And then there was a period like everyone, I read a lot of Chomsky. Do you know Chomsky?
oh, yeah, of course.
Well, there was a period through the 80s, I read thousands of pages, probably by 1990, I'd read sort of all of his political work practically up until that point. I sort of, at some point, you've read enough. But those experiences left me with a skepticism about the press. But it was really when I got crosswise with Wall Street. You know, I came across some really dirty business on Wall Street.
Talk about that. Talk about that for a minute.
It gets very technical. It's up on deep capture, but the settlement system, the savings of Americans have been, well, I'll put it this way. 3 years ago, a bunch of pension funds filed a suit against Wall Street. That's probably the first $1 trillion lawsuit in American history, because they had figured out that the pension funds had been looted by Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and a few of the big guys in a very deep way that they had not understood. That thing they're talking about, which is the same thing that Alan Greenspan referred to in 2008 as the thing that really was the root cause of the crisis, is the thing I figured out in 2005.
Well, in 2005, that was short selling though, right?
Well, short selling short selling is a phrase used. It's naked short selling, which is something different. It's as different as sex is from sexual harassment. You know, they're two different things, but but really.
So the naked short selling is sex.
Well, the naked short selling is the sexual harassment. It's illegal. If someone were out there complaining about sexual harassment and people responded, "Oh, this person just doesn't like sex," you'd say they're kind of confused. Sexual harassment isn't a type of sex. Naked short selling is not really a type of short selling. A sea lion is not a type of lion.
Right.
So
right.
It's this other activity, and even that was just a window into the underlying issue, which is the settlement system. And the settlement system of American capital markets has huge holes in it. And Goldman and others had found ways to basically loot, open up a poppycock, I think it's called, on the bottom of the tank of the savings of America and drain. It was so. What I discovered though, and it all turned out to be true. Everybody by 2008, everyone had gotten that I'd been right. There were vindication stories, and then the cone of silence came over me. But what was interesting for those 3 years, I thought the world worked like it did for Julia Roberts in Pelican Brief, where she figures out the world, she writes it up, puts the brief, and the Washington Post swoops in, and the DOJ swoops in, and they whisk her up. Well, reality is nothing like that. In reality, when you figure out the big, something like that, all the forces of power and authority reveal themselves and go to work. So I lived this really crazy 3-year cover-up where I had the facts, I had the data, I had economists, I had whistleblowers to prove that there was this enormous crime going on Wall Street. And the 5 or 6 journalists who really set the guardrails for discourse on Wall Street, who are all in the pocket. I don't know why or how, or I don't mean it literally for pay, but I suspect some of them. They just set this discourse. I mean, they used to run, when I came out and said the SEC is inappropriately close to Wall Street and actually seems to be protecting Wall Street to the injury of America. They used to run photos of me in the New York Post with UFOs coming out of my head, because that was a crazy conspiracy theory to say, what, the SEC is too close to what, you know. It's funny. There's a kind of, it's a common term in economics, something called capture, regulatory capture. So among economists, that's a very well-known phenomenon. But I would have to deal with these journalists, and at first I just thought they were kind of dumb, but they had good educations. And then I just realized if they're not on the take, they should be. Ultimately, many financial journalists are really speaking the book of certain hedge funds that are really their primary sources, and they get those hedge funds use them. So it's kind of a Marxist interpretation, actually. But anyway, my understanding of power in the media changed over those years, and I realized Chomsky had been at least directionally correct.
Well, I will add to your bank experience. A few years ago, I had worked up this proposal called Bank Whistleblowers. And it featured Richard Bowen of Citigroup, who is a well-known bank whistleblower, Gary Aguirre, who was an SEC
I know him
whistleblower.
well.
Yeah,
We're
okay.
friends. He's a great guy.
Oh, you are? Okay, so you know Gary.
He should be an American hero.
Oh, he is an American hero, except, you know.
There should be a statue of him somewhere, I mean.
Exactly. Gary.
If they had listened to him, 08 would not have happened.
Well, yeah. Bill Black, I had him also. And I had Michael Winston, who blew the whistle on Countrywide. This was all about the subprime in 2008, right?
Right.
So I was so thrilled to have all these guys, and nobody at the networks would touch it. I was pitching it everywhere. And I finally went to Vice, which Vice is considered, you know, it's edgy, it's cool, it's, you know,
Right.
It'll do what the other networks won't do, whatever. And so
Right.
we went to Vice. Vice loved it. They loved it. Okay. And we had these meetings. They said, well, can we do this? Can we do it? Yes, yes, yes. Months later. And then all of a sudden they said, okay, we're going to go talk to the money people about the budget and so on. And next thing you know, silencio.
Oh.
Silencio, nada. And I was like, well, this is weird. I mean, they just loved us so much. We've been there a million times, whatever. And finally, the one thing that thrilled me was, for the first time in my career as a journalist, somebody from the outlet, they came back and they said, the higher up said, this is too hot to handle. And
yeah, absolutely not. If it's Gary Aguirre, especially.
Well,
what he knows cannot be, what he knows, they cannot let the public understand.
Exactly. And the thing is that, well, I mean, you're looking at, I think I'm the only journalist in the United States, the only American journalist who has been hired and blackballed 3 times by the networks, because I was a network producer.
That's high praise. That's high praise, Christina. That's high praise.
So, and every time it happened to me, the first 2 times was while I was covering the crash of TWA Flight 800. And
you've got some sensitivities there.
Oh, I'll send you the documentary that took me 17 years to do on that one. It took me 17 years.
Are you of the camp that says it was not Libya, it was Iranian?
No. That TWA Flight 800 is the airline you're talking about. No, you're talking about Lockerbie, right?
You're right. The TWA 800 is the one that took off from Long Island and went.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry.
And that had some sensitivities too, because as you know, the minute it crashed, the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, everybody was there. The Navy, everybody was there. And that was not for no reason, as I discovered when I lost my my fabulous producing gig at CBS as a result of that.
Was
But
there ever any truth to the story that there were eyewitnesses who claimed that there was a missile involved?
yeah, look, I'm going to send you my documentary. You'll
Okay.
see, because it's 5 whistleblowers. It's like half a dozen whistleblowers who finally came forward to talk about how their investigation was undermined. And in our film, we brought them all together to compare notes for the first time, because it was a highly compartmentalized investigation for a reason. And you'll see, I'll send it to you.
Please do.
But the thing is this: you, with this election 2020 being rigged, you know, that's a third rail issue for you know, the power, as you call the oligarchy and the deep state. That's a third rail issue in those quarters. And so I was very surprised, because somebody like you don't have to do this, you know. And that's why I was impressed by the fact that you actually you jumped in, you know, hands, feet, arms, legs, everything to do this. And that's, you know, but I wasn't surprised after I saw the bank stuff.
Thank you.
So,
and if you read back a couple on Deep Capture, about a year ago, I came out and I started coming out and writing some things about some stuff I'd been involved with. So, well, thank you for noticing. It's, you know, it's kind of funny. It's kind of, we may, my feelings about the left over the years. So I did a PhD in philosophy. And I was sick in my 20s. I had cancer a few times, and I was kind of an invalid on and off for most of my 20s.
wow.
So knock on wood. I came to the conclusion, when I really settled my political convictions, they are that the left is correct. It's almost invariably correct about what's wrong with the world. They're generally, not always, but generally incorrect, I believe, about how to fix the problems, but they are correct about the problems, and in a way that the right does not see. So there's a lot of common cause between us. And I want to be clear, I did not vote for Mr. Trump, have never voted Republican in my life for president. I've never voted Democrat either. I'm a small L libertarian. My voting mechanism, I might as well describe, because it's probably of interest. I'm normally not public about it, but is in 1988, I stood in the voting booth and I couldn't get myself to pull the lever for either side, and I decided on an algorithm, and that is, from then on, I go down and I vote for every libertarian, because violence is immoral and the state is organized violence. Then for every woman, and then anything left over, I look at the job. If it has to do with money or crime, I vote Republican. If it has to do with social welfare, I vote Democrat. And that way, it's probably, I don't have to
Very intelligent. I thought of that.
That's how I've always voted. And that way I can vote in 90 seconds and I never have to listen to these guys. And that's probably, anyway. So that's where I come from. And I'm coming at this election not from some diehard Trump supporter, but if this was hopelessly, they really went for broke here. This is the oligarchy going for broke. And it's obvious. And the techniques we're seeing and such are reinforcing. Anyway, this wasn't even close. This wasn't even close. So that's why I did it. It's as natural as breathing. I see this as, if this stands, there will never be a free election again in our country, probably.
Well, what is it that first made you think, you know, this is not kosher?
Well, actually, I've been on this since August. And by the way, this inures to the benefit of both Democrats and Republicans. There are Republicans who have made, so this really started for me, this phase started in August. And here's why. Let me go back 2 years. In 2018, there was an election in Dallas that had irregularities. And the state government of Texas ordered a special governor's panel to look into it. And the cybersecurity group they hired it was a group of people at a very elite group of military intelligence, federal law enforcement type people, former, who had this company. And they studied it for 2 years. And what they discovered is that there's about a dozen ways you can hack an election. And hack used in the most general sense, both including keyboard hacks and cheat in the more general sense, cheating. And
Do you
so
know what those dozen ways are?
yes. Well, I mean, if you even look at these Dominion machines, they are physically almost designed to be vulnerable. They have ports on them that and some kind of R232 port, anyone who accesses has root level access to the system. They have chip slots that should be glued over inside, but because they're not, if someone can physically access the machine for a few seconds and drop a chip in there, they can download something, unload. They have, in addition, and there's an article on this on ZDNet, I think, a hacker's kind of place, called about a type of software of malware that has been installed on them called QSnatch, or that has infected them. And QSnatch steals people's credentials. And it's widely, there are hacker journals who have reported from this summer, they were saying this is widely infecting the Dominion machines. Well, that means anyone who logs on with their administrator credentials, or any credentials from a precinct, your credentials get snatched. They say there are 66,000 machines in the US that have this, Dominion machines. Their credentials get snatched, and somebody back in the Ukraine or China can then log on to that precinct machine and take it over and move votes around. So anyone who's telling you this stuff is secure, I've been working since August with various hackers and a couple of cybersecurity, very professional groups and ethical hackers. And now we rate it, and these are professional hackers. I barely know which end to plug into the toaster, but they, I built, no, that's better. I did build, I will say.
I don't believe that.
I built a $2 billion tech company. So,
right.
So anyway, and I can tell you that these are on a scale of 1 to 10. In terms of their hackability, they're a 2, maybe a 1. This is child's play to defeat these systems. It's almost,
wow.
Yeah. And
well, go ahead.
No,
go ahead. No, I just wanted to say, I remember back before the Bush election, they were talking about those D-Bolt machines that somebody actually went on the radio with a hacker. I remember that. It was an arresting moment on the radio, and the guy hacked the machine in less than a minute.
Right. Right. Well, it's still the same. It's still the same. Whether you have physical access or not, these are all hackable. And you can't assume that it's just going to benefit the Democrats or the Republicans. Deals are getting made. I mean, it's the DNA of our republic that the atomic concept that I think unites us all, wherever we are on the spectrum, is consent of the governed. That's the one thing liberalism is that, the atomic concept is consent of the governed, philosophical liberalism. And if you have corrupt voting mechanisms, that's you're polluting the drinking water of a village or something. It's in a democracy, the first institution that has to be correct and rigorous is the election systems, and these are far from it.
So, okay, so it started in August for you.
Yes.
And so what did you do? You got in touch with these hackers, or you just said, you read this article about how easily hacked these machines were, and then what did you do?
Well, I started working with them. I started funding a group of different investigators and people to examine. And truth is, they prepared a presentation for the Department of Homeland Security. Oddly enough, CISA, C-I-S-A, which is the infrastructure group within there that is supposed to be protecting our computer infrastructure, they were really averse to being briefed on it. The Department of Homeland Security was briefed, but the part within the government whose very function is to guarantee the election technology would not attend the briefing, even though higher ups were pushing them to. So, and these are Republicans, I'm telling you. So there's Republicans and Democrats. This is, here's an interesting thing. When Bernie stepped down in 2016, I understand more of his supporters went to Trump than went to Hillary. And I'm friends with a certain well-known movie actress, and she was one of them. And I guess you can divide the world. There are people who see it left, right, but there are also people who see it elites versus the people. And if you look at it from that perspective, you can see why Bernie and Trump both know something. There's something that they both know that the mainstream does not get yet, that the mainstream is trying to keep this illusion over people's head. But there is something that both Bernie and Trump know. And that is the elites have ripped off the people. Now, they clearly differ on what you do about it and all kinds of stuff, but that they understand it's turned into a system of exploitation and oppression. And so again, I didn't vote for Bernie, did not vote for Trump. I vote straight. I'm a small L libertarian, but there is that shared knowledge that wherever you come from on the spectrum, you have to be against our election systems being so compromised, unless you're just in favor of elite rule.
I mean, this is the thing that I find terrifying at this point, okay? Given my entire experience over a number of major investigative stories, because I'm an investigative reporter, is the complete corruption that exists to protect these very powerful interests. And meanwhile, and this is where the press is this, I find the American population the most heavily propagandized population in the world. I mean, they really think that this is a free country. They really feel like, yes, okay, so there's a little stealing over here and a steal. To me, these aren't even left, right, these are fundamental issues of, I don't care if you're on the left or the right. Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants honesty, a decent education. I mean, okay, every population has its 5% or whatever percent of psychopaths or whatever. But, we all know what the basic rules should be,
I think it's working. Yes.
And yet I find people, and, even in my own tribe is when I first ran into it among journalists, this corruption through silence, okay? If you're not going to directly contribute by just reporting the official narrative with no questions or with no fact checking, because you know what you're going to find, and if you report it, you're going to lose that source, and if you lose that source, you lose your value to the network or to the outlet. That's the problem that they have. They're in a vise, and yet they prefer to go corrupt. And
Christine,
I can't.
We're separated at birth here. You're reading my email. That's exactly how I came to perceive things too. And is it their desire to be activists? Is it their desire that they're comfortable, they reach the point where they have good jobs and they don't want to make waves? You tell me.
I had a very interesting conversation once with Robert Perry, a very well-respected, sort of to the left reporter. He was a mainstream reporter. He blew the whistle on for Newsweek. I think what was it, Iran-Contra? He got into trouble for his reporting on Iran-Contra or something. Very good guy, right? And I was talking to him about what happened to Gary Webb. I don't know if you know who Gary Webb was.
Was he a journalist? Yeah.
He was a journalist. He ended up committing suicide because he had exposed CIA connections to the crack cocaine epidemic in.
He committed suicide in a motel in West Virginia or something, right?
Well, no, I don't know where he committed suicide.
But
No, at home. I think at home in California. He'd lost his wife and everything. Why? Because he had done this amazing story called Dark Alliance, and that's when the internet was brand new, and he had all this documentation on the internet and so on. And he worked for the San Jose Mercury News, and he exposed
Contra connection. Yeah.
Yeah, he exposed CIA connection between the crack cocaine explosion and drug smuggling that was helped along, by the government to help finance Iran-Contra. Okay. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues, Mike Levine, I'll never forget when he showed me a piece of paper, a page from Oliver North's diary that said, "Pick up coca paste." So anyway,
You'd think he'd at least be smart enough to say, bananas or something.
Yeah, or whatever. No, I mean, so anyway, Gary puts this out. It's huge. The government's hair goes on fire. Washington Post, New York Times are like, who the hell is this guy? And they start to bash him and bash him and bash him until finally his editor backed off and stopped supporting Gary. And Gary was blackballed. And this was a guy who lived to do the work that he did. And he ended up killing himself. So later on, I talked to Bob Perry, this reporter, and I said, I'm so shocked at his editor that he did that he didn't. All the documentation, Michael, was right there. All the documentation for Michael Levine, that Michael Levine also had. Michael Levine is this DEA agent who was the one who had the page that said, pick up the coca page, that Michael had, Gary had, still his editor backed off. So anyway, I said to Perry, how could his editor do that? I mean, he sparked his demise, the demise of this great journalist. And you know what he said to me?
What?
He said to me, well, you got to kind of forgive him because he was ill at the time and he needed his medical insurance. And that may have been the reason. And I don't know, I felt like a deer in the headlights in the sense, because I feel compassion for the guy, because if that's the situation, that's the situation, and you have a family to support. But by the same token, if you sign up to be a journalist, it's a huge privilege. It's a huge public service.
It is. It's sacred. It's sacred.
It really is.
But I get crosswise with journalists. The ones I get crosswise are the ones who seem to me like, that's why I get a little chippy sometimes with journalists. It's like, I want to shake them and say, you're just being another brick in the wall. Here's these facts. Why don't you follow them? And some of them just choose to be just another brick in the wall. And why did you become a journalist?
Do you know what my question is?
Why?
Some of them, I just have the urge to say, does your mother know you're doing this? I mean,
Spoken like a mother. You might, yeah.
Yes. I mean,
yeah.
How can you do that? I mean, look at okay. So
and when you do it, you're doing something to millions of people. You're letting down millions of people. You wouldn't let them down if they were in your living room. You probably shouldn't let them down if they're around the country.
You are literally changing their lives, especially if you are a journalist who finally has a story and the truth about something that is so huge, that has such huge implications, okay? For you to then back away from it because you want to hold on to your health insurance, or I get it. It's hard to be a whistleblower. It's hell. It's hell. I mean,
it's weird. Can I tell you, when I finally went forward a year ago and spoke about my involvement in the Maria Butina matters, were you aware when I did that last year?
No, I wasn't. But tell my audience who
I
Maria
went on
Butina.
television, and Maria Butina was this Russian spy, allegedly, putatively, and I had been involved in some matters concerning her. And I gave up my CEO job. I built Overstock.com, started and built it, and was the CEO for 20 years. And I came forward knowing that it would probably cost me my job because it would be so controversial. Public company CEO can't come out and say what I was going to say. If you read, even to go back a couple stories on deep capture, you'll see that I have written a lot about that. But I was involved. Remember that striking redhead that was put in prison for 18 months?
Yep.
Well, I was involved in those matters, and I knew it from the inside. And
What did you know?
that's a whole other story. I don't want to mix it with this election stuff. If
Okay.
you want to, you can go on deep capture, read those stories, and have me back, and I'll talk about that.
Okay.
But I was heavily involved in both the Russian investigation and the Clinton investigation, and I've put up. I'm gonna get iced. I'm gonna have to go live on a nuclear submarine or something. But I have put up on deep capture my involvement in those two issues. So if you go to deep capture, you'll see the whole truth about Maria Butina and some things regarding the Clinton investigation.
Oh, I'm
Um,
very interested in that coming from Haiti because a lot of the earthquake money.
oh my God, I've never met. If all you have to do is say to someone who comes from Haiti is bring up the name Clinton, and
Yeah.
they can see the Clintons laid themselves bare on what they did in Haiti. It's obscene. It's
Yeah.
obscene. They were a crime machine. The left can do much better than that. This may really create an opportunity. What's going to happen? One of two things is going to happen. Either this is a coup. What's going on now, and I'm sure most of your listeners are not people who voted for Trump, and I'm not someone who voted for Trump. That's not the issue here.
Actually, you'd be surprised, and I'll tell you why.
Tell me.
Because I don't, and my audience knows this. I don't care what wing the truth flies on. I don't care about left or right. I just care about what's true. And, it's interesting because I do have, I have a lot of friends on both sides, and my left wing friends keep telling me, oh my God, why are you supporting Trump? I said, I'm not supporting Trump. I'm not. I'm trying to get, yes. And our election process, it's been dirty and rigged for a long time.
Good for you.
So if finally people are stepping forward and doing the work and presenting the evidence, why shouldn't I present that?
Of course.
You know?
Eleanor Roosevelt said, great minds speak of ideas, average minds speak of events, weak minds speak of people. And it seems to me that for the last 4 years, this country has just spoken about Donald Trump. We have to get off this. People, he's like living rent free in the brains of the left and the right. He's just living rent free there. Come on, we have to have. There are better conversations to have.
Oh, he's driven the left nuts. I mean,
they're yeah. And
they're so angry, and you can't be that way when you're talking about what's what. Okay,
right.
I mean. It's not a choice, really. If you look at Biden and Trump, if you really look at the two of them, both of them should be going through the courts for one thing or another. So the choice that you're given already, these people have gone through a process that creates two untenable choices already, it seems like.
Well, certainly stylistically, Mr. Trump is not his style, but you got to get past the style. Yeah,
I agree.
And he's done some things. I'm kind of surprised that the left hasn't noticed on some things. Like I remember a generation ago, the Seattle protests against the World Trade Organization, and the people questioning really is completely free trade. It may have all kinds of pernicious effects. We're not were not understanding yet. And at the time, I got to confess, I didn't see the logic in their arguments. Well, I came over the last, what was that, 23 years ago or something. When were those Seattle protests? 97,
90,
98?
yeah, 90,
Well,
yeah,
I came to
mid
see
90s somewhere. Yeah.
there turned out to be a lot of truth in what they said. And what we did with NAFTA and with the World Trade Organization and GATS, it hollowed out America, and it
Yes, it did.
totally hurt the working class. It really hurt working and low income people whose jobs were shipped to, place where you could pay people in
India
Haiti,
and
you pay
yeah,
people
and
to work a
Haiti.
day. And they turned out to be right about a bunch of things.
No,
And so
you're
I would have thought that
absolutely
they
right.
would have recognized that Trump is the first politician to come along in 20 years that sort of raised those issues again. And so there is some common cause to be made if you can see past the stylistic problems, which are, of course, but you know what? Someone pointed out to me once, I was saying something about another politician in town. This was an economist who was close to that politician. And he said, Patrick, you got to understand, all these people are what any normal person, and I was actually talking about Hillary Clinton at the time, and this was a decade ago. And the fellow said, Patrick, who was defending Hillary to me, said, you got to understand, all these people who do that are kind of wacky. They're megalomaniac. You just have to get over that, because no one would ever go into that field who didn't have some kind of, so you just sort of have to maybe put some of the aspects, all of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are
Look, here's what I'm
not
saying.
people you would have as neighbors, not
I,
people you would want as neighbors. And you got
I
to get over
agree.
that.
No, I agree. I agree. I think that, first of all, when you have that kind of power, when you achieve the power of life and death over millions of people, or you can affect their lives like that, it's just like when you hear that if kill one man, you're a murderer, kill a million and you're a king. I mean, it's a different paradigm up there. It's a different paradigm. And I understand that there are extreme, there could be extreme evil, extreme corruption, and there could be goodness. I mean, you're right. In Trump's case, Trump wanted to bring manufacturing back to the United States. He wanted the United States to become self-sufficient again, He doesn't want the wars. That's one thing I think the left.
Oh my God, why don't they give him credit? Jesus Christ, this guy's bringing peace to the Middle East. And look, he's pulling us out of Afghanistan and Iraq and saying, what are we doing in these endless wars? That used to be an honorable position for the left to hold. What do they want? More war? And
well, I'll tell you, it looks like they might get it this time. I don't know. But my point being, of course, exactly what you're saying. There's distasteful, and there are also good aspects. But what I think could help to mitigate the negative aspects, if there was more accountability for corruption in this country. We just don't hold, beyond a certain level of power, we just don't hold people accountable.
Well, it's all compromised. It's all captured. It's actually, again, a Marxist term so there's this concept economists came out with 49 years ago, and it was a friend of Milton Friedman. Now, just to orient me, Milton Friedman was my great friend.
I know. Oh, he was? Oh,
right, he was. But I think the left should revisit Milton Friedman, by the way. He would define himself as a small L libertarian and a small R Republican. But, Milton Friedman, the thing he was most proud of in his life, you look up his autobiography, it was his role in ending the draft. He was on the commission, and he did some wonder, and school choice is his thing. And school choice to me is how we save the republic. And 72% of Black people and 70% of Hispanics support school choice. I think that the racial issues, this is where I say the left is generally correct about the problems, generally incorrect about how to solve them. They're absolutely right to be freaking out about the racial situation in this country. I'm just old, and I was born in '62. I'm just old enough to remember the '60s and the civil rights movement and the high promise. And but what happened after that, it's been 50 years, and black people have a right to say, this has failed us. The deal we made, the bargain we made 55 years ago, they have failed us in some way. We look around, things aren't better. That bargain has to be restruck. I'm 100% down with that program. Again, I think that some of what the left is fighting for in that regard is a mistake. I think some of it is absolutely true. And at the end of, when you get to the end of all their demands on BLM, it's fixing the school system. And that's exactly, if we could have a proper school system, all kinds of things would wash out over the space of 10 years, 15 years, and all kinds of problems would be fixed. And until we fix that system, I think we're kind of rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic. It really comes back to me, fixing the education system, which I think you fix by giving parents choice. I never met an inner city mother who did not understand the way to break the cycle is get education for my children. That's what they want. And the current system is failing them. So, I have to, it's kind of a smorgasbord where I pick and choose the things I agree with. Too many people approach their political beliefs now like they're football fans, and I'm for the Redskins. Or no, what is
exactly?
I'm for the Dallas Cowboys. It's, come on, we got to have a better discussion than that.
You know who, even though I got my face ripped off once for saying this, have you ever read Lee Kuan Yew's book?
On the 13 bankers? I'm sorry.
Lee Kuan Yew, yeah, who took Singapore from a third world country. You should read his book. It's fascinating because he did, first of all, this man was the ultimate nationalist. He loved his country and he really wanted to lift his country up. I don't even know if he took any money for being the head of state for so long. I can't remember, but this is a guy who, there was zero corruption. And what he did was he looked around the world for best practices for virtually every government institution. Okay. He went to the Brits for administration, for education. I forget who he went to, but anyway, he went to whoever had the best system, the most successful system, he went to them. And that's how he did it. That's how he did it, He also practiced, as I recall, he liberalized economically, but kept sort of political authoritarianism, a soft authoritarianism. And his approach was economic liberalization. And then at some point, the authoritarianism can fade. And it became, I was just over there when I fled the country last year after coming public. I went and stayed in Singapore a couple months. And I've been there before a few times. It's a wonderful place. Well, and it's free now and well off. Well, it's so interesting because one thing he did was he built public housing. And there was the Muslims and the Muslims didn't want to live with the Christians and this and that and the other. And he was like, this is public housing, very nice housing. If you want to live here, your neighbor is going to have to be something other than who you are. So everybody's going to be in there together. And it was huge. It was a huge social rearrangement because everybody discovered, oh yeah, we really are the same. Yeah, we may have a different religion, but we all want the same things for our kids. We want a decent life. We want this and that. And it really changed the society. So he had and it's interesting. I mean, it really came out of a deep love for his country and his people. And I don't see that. Here I just see like a basket of crabs, everybody trying to compete with each other to reach a certain level. And then at that level, it's like me, myself, and my tribe. And, let me see how much I can suck out of this system or how much. It's weird. It's almost like we need I don't know how to say it, like a spiritual transformation or something. I don't know. How do you? Well, big questions. I do think that giving parents choice would
create an opportunity for teachers to become extraordinarily well paid. And
Yes.
we get much better education. You know, what we have now, here's a way I've learned to get across to people on the left about the benefits of school choice. Right now, there's about 400, for every teacher in American public schools, there's about $450,000 of funding. Now, last time I
Wow.
checked, yeah, they weren't making $450,000. They're making about $55,000 on average. And when you include benefits, it's about 70. So there's $450,000 going in for every teacher. There's 70 getting to the teachers. And how much does it cost to run a classroom? It's about 30 grand a year. So you can see where about 100 grand goes. I mean, the physical, having a classroom, heating it,
Where does
sweeping,
the rest?
goes to a bunch of, yeah, that's the question. And you'll never get there as long as you have a top-down hierarchy. It's all getting, half the money. People forget that behind their local elementary school that they love so much, there are district, county, state, and federal bureaucracies. Now, every time you try to talk about those bureaucracies and how they're sucking up half the money, people trot out the local elementary school teachers and say, you hate these teachers. No, I love the teachers. That's not the issue. Let's talk about this massive bureaucracy behind the scenes that's really sucking out half or more of the funding.
Right.
And you can't fix that until you give parents a choice. But anyway, it's more than that. It's the corporatization of our media. Some of it is psychological. That journalists, I saw when I fought Wall Street, I finally had it explained to me that there were 5 or 6 journalists who really set they were the hedge fund beat. They were the 4 or 5 major publications. They set the hedge fund beat was their beat. And then what they wrote set the guardrails, and other journalists could come along. You got to basically stay within, a couple yards of that. You can't really get outside the guardrails. If the truth turns out to be out here, you just can't say it. And that's corporate media.
That's exactly right. And that's why you got the pushback that you got. We don't have much time left. I just want to say really quickly about Lee Kuan Yew, one more thing.
Sure.
2 things he did. He paid the teachers excessively well, which attracted very high level people to the profession. And he paid all the government agency heads like CEOs. He paid them huge salaries to keep the corruption, at bay. And it worked.
I've been thinking of that. I happen to be in Washington, D.C. right now. And I've been thinking of that. So as a small L libertarian, I'm supposed to hate the government workers. And it's, I don't. And I've had experience over the years, maybe more experience than I've had my brushes with the authorities on many an occasion, and maybe more in my future. But I do have to say that the quality of people I meet turn out to be much higher. Not that I agree with them, but I thought that, if you believe the comic strips, you think it's a bunch of dummies, and it's not a bunch of dummies. They make about, on average, twice what you make in the private sector. If you're an executive assistant in the private sector and you make 40 grand on average, in government it's 80 when you include all the benefits and everything. But I have to say, the people I meet, and I'm always, as a CEO, built a number of companies, I'm kind of always judging people up when I meet them in those kind of professional contexts. And I generally think, gee, it's very rare that I don't meet a federal employee that, whether we're adversarial or not, I can tell these are people who are sort of in the top 5 or 10% of their profession. If they're an executive,
they care, and they care.
Yeah, they care. They care about what they care about. But in terms of quality of people, they're good, but very good, really top 5 or 10%. But something's gone wrong. Something's gone wrong with the system. I think people have forgotten what made us work, and how, when things did work, what made it work. I don't know. These are big big questions to solve. I know if time's short, I should just remind people, go to Deep Capture, and I laid out in one paper all the evidence about why this election was rigged. And I'm sorry for those people who don't want to hear, who wanted Biden to win. But this isn't about Biden or Trump. This is about the DNA of our system has been compromised, and we need to. And good for you to understand that. Also, 16 years ago, people at the grassroots level started telling me there's far more corruption in the voting system than anyone is acknowledging, and there's actually money. Becoming a precinct. If you're down in some sleepy rural I don't want to name the state, but Georgia or Louisiana area, and you become an election official, you have all kinds of things offered to you. And there's all kinds of ways, if you're an administrator or above, you can cheat the system.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
the Republicans do it and the Democrats do it.
Well, Michael.
Patrick.
I'm Michael. I keep thinking about Michael Levine. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on. We've got to continue this discussion.
It'd be my honor. I'm actually looking for a way to speak to, if I may be presumptuous, to speak more to the left. I think that we're about to go through a very hard series of events in this country, and we need to reestablish an honest discourse. Some people from both sides need to, I don't know if they'll speak to Republicans, but we need to reestablish an honest discourse and start moving forward. And not more of what we've been going through for years.
I agree 1,000%. Thank you for coming on, Patrick, and we'll do this again for sure.
Anytime, Christine, I'm honored. Thank you very much.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.